Hi, this is John Atack, and I, yet again, much to my pleasure and delight, have Chris Shelton as a guest. Hi, Chris.
Hey.
How you doing?
Very happy to be here. It's always, it's almost a relief to have conversations with you sometimes because the world's a little mad right now in some places.
Yeah.
And, I hate to use this expression because it's a Hubbardism, but, my islands of sanity sometimes seem to be farther and farther apart in certain areas. You know what I mean? I'm doing fine, but sometimes it just gets a little overwhelming. So I always look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. And it's 5 years now, we almost since we first spoken. It's the conversations have become ever more interesting for me.
Me too.
Realizing that you're actually even smarter than I thought you were, and you have interesting things to say that make me think, so it's all fantastic, So we've spent hours talking about recovery, and we got into this this unavailable book.
Yes.
That section. I think it's Judith Herman who originally published this list of the symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and we got up to number 6, and we've got number 7, and then thank God we'll be done with it, and we'll have recovered completely. So the 6th section is called Alterations in Relations with Others, including Isolation and Withdrawal. So do you feel during your recovery, I never really got the chance to isolate myself or withdraw. We're all doing it now, COVID-19. But I because there were people all over me, but I did withdraw. It was funny because you had all of these independents, all of these people who wanted to do this thing, and I'm going, this doesn't make sense to me anymore. And I had to be very careful about how I expressed that to people for a while. But I think that's probably not what they're talking about here. So in your own experience and your experience of the many other people you've spoken with, isolation and withdrawal as a way of, you can't deal with the people around you, I think is what's being said, or you don't want to deal with them. Was that something that afflicted you at any point?
Absolutely, it did. In fact, as things become clearer and clearer over the years and you start contemplating things, and then situations in life will sometimes highlight things. And this COVID-19 situation actually has highlighted something for me that I don't know that I would have necessarily seen otherwise, because I had sort of accommodated or acclimated my life to this particular way that I've lived, which is that I'm here in this apartment. I work full-time from my home. I'm now married, so my wife lives here, but up until then I was just by myself, and coming right out of Scientology and the Sea Org and stuff. And I used to think of myself coming out of when I first got out of Scientology, first got out of the Sea Org, was, out there loud and proud and talking and getting on Karen's channel, started my own channel. I thought of myself as an extrovert. I was described that way. It was very clear. I was, boisterous, talkative. I didn't have a problem in front of, people. But as the years have gone on, that has gone away. And my sociality, my desire to be in big social situations has reduced. I still love getting out and meeting people. I still love getting out and talking to people. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like becoming some, closet dweller or something.
Recluse.
Yeah, recluse. That's it. Yeah, I'm not becoming that. But but my own view of my introversion, extroversion, and where it probably has actually always been, and the fact that is that I was a pretty introverted kid. I wasn't out there. I wasn't a sports kid. I wasn't like big. I spent days at the library. I was one of those guys, bookworms. I'd even walk around in school reading. It was just that's kind of who I was.
Very sad.
Well, kind of, but just kind of who I was. And it didn't work out so well when it came to social life and dates, but Scientology really puts you there that, when in doubt, communicate, communication's universal solvent, all that. Well, I really took those words to heart.
Mm.
And so and my parents were pretty big on communication. So I guess during the time that I was in Scientology, especially as a management person, which is the first place I went in the Sea Org, and as a staff member, as a course room supervisor, as an executive, you're not really permitted. It's not really allowed that you be an introvert.
Mm.
It's not really allowed that you cloister yourself. You have to deal with the public. You have to do certain things. I had to hold graduations. I had to give success stories when I finished things, stuff like that. And I've found since that it was kind of, I don't want to say it was forced on me to be an extrovert, but I would just say that it wasn't my nature. And then but it was so much part of my activity as a Scientologist, as a Sea Org member, that I sort of assessed myself wrongly as this, extroverted person. And so kind of my recovery sort of, been, this sort of, not reclusion, but, this sort of pulling in a little bit myself personally, but being actually okay with that, as opposed to that being a bad thing. Like I know there are lots and lots of people I've interacted with over the years who come out of a destructive cult and just disappear. They just don't want to talk about it, don't want to hear about it, don't want to have anything to do with it. And I get that. I totally get that. I was the exact opposite.
It's called denial.
Well, I suppose it is from a certain perspective. I don't want to be super judgy about people because we all have our needs and they are very individual. But I don't think running and hiding is very much of a solution for sure,
And denial, as Ronnie Jana Bullman says in her Shattered Assumptions, which is a fantastic book about PTSD, which is what we're talking about. She says denial is a protective mechanism. It's not just, I'm not going to think about that. Sometimes it takes a while to digest. So, but yeah, absolutely.
And I didn't take that time. I took zero time.
No, me neither.
I wanted to get the word out.
Yeah.
That was my thing.
Yeah.
Because I think my desire to help overrode myself, my own introversion. And that was a habit. Mm-hmm. It was, I could go full martyr with that, helping people until I, sort of thing. But yes. So I have learned also over this time that it's a good thing to withdraw sometimes, to give yourself some space. I had to learn how to do that. So in a way, I guess my experience was kind of the opposite, but yet I get it. I would say that still applied to me in a way. And I know, but I have to say it was all up here, That's how I think that's how I could describe that. I don't know if that really communicates because I don't really know that I fully understand it all myself.
No, I think it's a really important point. And in Scientology, the demand, every group has its ideal person, how you're meant to, if you're a Puritan, you're meant to frown all the time and only wear black clothes. And you're not meant to dance or sing. There are the group norms. And in Scientology, of course, right from the publication of Dianetics, the idea is that you're enthusiastic. You're at tone all the time, which is the extrovert. My situation is very similar to yours. I probably didn't spend as much time in the library as you did, but I've always been thoughtful. I've always been shy, and I would have thought of myself as, maybe slightly introverted. On years ago, I did the Myers-Briggs personality test, and we have questions about that. But nonetheless, the guy who did the assessment looked and he said, there must be something wrong. He'd only just learned how to do them the weekend before. He said, there's something wrong because you actually are the exact central point on introversion, extroversion. And I was told that nobody is balanced on that. And it surprised me. It's like, well, I would have thought of myself as being, but I learned to, go on stages and do things, and I enjoy it now. And so, because I'm a show off, what can I say? But
I think that's where I got to as a Sea Org member and Scientologist. I mean, there's certainly, for me, it was, I was motivated by the fact that people like me. People like to hear what I had to say. And I actually got pretty good at it.
yeah,
I wasn't great to start. I sucked at the beginning, but but it's just something, when it gets forced on you and you have to do it, you have to run the graduation every week. You have to do the roll calls in the course rooms. I mean, if you're like the guy who can't deal with people, those aren't jobs you're going to be able to deal with. So,
and it's again, Christian Choko and I were talking the other week, and I think it's gone up somewhere about, are there benefits to be found? And that part of his approach and part of my approach has always been, what good did it do you as well? And of course, you're not forcing anybody or pushing anybody, but the notion that, you've just been harmed and damaged and you've learned nothing and it was a useless experience, that's which many people come away with. I've wasted my life. But the point is that, no, you will have learned something. And, as I said to him, when I left Scientology, I'm afraid, I still was, probably vaguely shy. But then lots of people would gather in rooms and demand that I tell them what was happening. And it just became something that I did. So familiarity bred content in this way. Okay. Alterations in relations with others, including disruption in intimate relationships.
Not by my causation. But I was also thrown off. I mean, I think to the degree that I also had just lost a fiance coming out of Scientology, getting declared. I had left the Sea Org to have that relationship. That was one of the three main reasons I left, in addition to going up the bridge and kind of having my own life outside of
not being in the Sea Org.
Yeah, exactly. Just get me the hell out of the Sea Org, right? But then I wanted to go up the bridge and I wanted to have this family. And it was right there. It was right there. This was the person. It was going to be great. She loved me. I loved her. Everything was awesome. And then it all fell apart because Scientology ripped it apart. And that's what they do. So having just lost that, I've commented endlessly about how, it took me a few years to learn how to process the emotions of it. But that also put me in a place where I was not at all ready to start having some other relationship. But it's hard for me to gauge whether that was, I think that was pretty obviously for me because I had just lost this very, very significant relationship, more so than I had lost Scientology. But what I will say on this, and I think that this is very applicable here, is my trust factor. It took a long time for me to start trusting people again, for real.
Yeah.
And really trust people. Because as a Scientology critic, of course, once you put yourself out there that way and you know about what fair gaming is, you really can't trust too many people that closely because you don't know where they're coming from. Took me a while, even with my wife, who I'm madly in love with and completely trust now. But it was actually kind of a significant moment a few years ago when it was like I was looking at her one day and I realized I could trust her completely. Very new, different experience for me after years of, and I told her straight up when we started dating too. I said, look, I got trust issues, and I have reason to. So, this is going to be a slow progression. And it was. And that was okay. That was really, really okay. Because I had also had a history in the past of rushing into relationships because of the way Scientology operates. So that was a factor in leaving as well. And it has been a slow thing. Now I'm very selective. I used to be, as a Scientologist, you can trust any other Scientologist with anything. I mean, you're so open all the time, and the demands to be open are so much there that the trust is just kind of implicitly there with all Scientologists. But after leaving that, I realized, oh no, you got to be real careful about that. And even to this day, there are few people that I would say I got zero question about them when it comes to, our relationship. So that might even be a lingering thing. And And on top of that is related to this question as well. Also, is I'm still not real keen on groups.
Yeah. Now, I've after leaving Scientology, a close friend of mine, Mitch, bought me a membership for Friends of the Earth, a group that I support entirely. And I had to say to him, "Could you send it back?" Somebody enrolled me with Amnesty, and I said, "Look, I absolutely admire Amnesty, but I can't do this." And the Open Minds Foundation, I had nearly 5 years there, 4 or 5 years, and it was difficult to from my part to actually, I'm so much a free agent, because I'm a painter, a writer, musician, what have you. I'm very used to making things on my own, and that if I start involving myself with other people, I mean, that's why it's partly why it's such a pleasure doing this with you, that when you do find people you can work with, it's fantastic. But I developed a different idea of trust even while I was still involved with Scientology, which was that you could trust people as far as you could know them, if you like. Not as far as you could throw them, but as far as you could know them. So that if you knew, there was an instance where one of my friends wanted to borrow money from another of my friends, who came to me and said, should I lend him money? I said, no, because he won't pay you back. It's not a matter of anything else. It's just I know him. And sure enough, the money was loaned. They didn't speak for a couple of years after that. I don't know if it ever did get resolved, because they both went out of my life. But I also, as you say, when the Investigation Aid UK defected and told me that 4 people in my close circle were reporting back to her, I couldn't, I made the decision that I couldn't vet people. If anybody came to me and said, I have a problem, I had to try and help them. But, having actually had 2 women, both of whom had husbands with multiple sclerosis, and in writing out the project to get me, it was pointed out that I have sympathy for people. I care about people who are harmed. And so a good way of getting at me was to have, somebody who was dying, and you could, it's like, great, you're a scheming bunch of people.
It's a nice way of putting it.
And then after leaving, I got into real trouble because after Scientology had just about finished with me and wiped the floor with me, people that had been friends of mine started joining in. So my trust issues, I became, from being absolutely philanthropic, I became kind of, well, I'm going to do my best to help you, but I am never going to trust you, And that took a little while to go away again. And like you, there are a few people, like say my friend Christian Churko or Steve Hassan, people I've known for 30 years, and I know that they're loyal. I know they'll, do whatever's necessary.
Yeah, exactly.
I've known you for 5 years, so we're getting there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting because you, it's like you said, as far as you know them, and you realize, as a Scientology, I guess actually really as a cult member, like I'm going to say as a cult member, I'm going to widen this out a little bit because, it's almost a characteristic almost of being in a cult that you lower, all your shields around other members of the group. That's almost an expectation that's going to happen. What's the matter? Don't you, trust us? Don't you, don't you trust our dear leader? He only has your best interests at heart, sort of thing.
Our members are siblings, and there's a problem in Scientology, especially because Scientology is a way of enhancing narcissism in people. That's basically what the bridge is. It's a bridge to being, and Hubbard says it, you go from being nothing, 0, to being infinity. And just you, 8.8008. And you'll have all of these superpowers where you'll be able to influence other people without their consent. You'll be able to get them to do what you want. And, it's pretty evil when you take it down to that. Not all authoritarian groups have that as their objective. But it means that Scientology attracts a lot of salespeople. a lot of people who are not ethical. And we had this guy down in East Grinstead, and he'd sold this coating to spray on houses. And one of my friends, in fact, a couple of my friends worked for him. And after a year, this coating fell off the houses. And the people who'd been given a lifetime guarantee didn't realize it was the lifetime of a mayfly that it was guaranteed for. They thought it was their lifetime. It's guaranteed for one day. And they came after him. And it was the advice he was given by ethics that in Scientology that fascinated me, which was leave the country. Because otherwise, the hundreds of thousands of pounds that he paid straight into his Florida account, they might have to give back. And that was, across the 8 dynamics, the best solution was that the people who'd been lied to and ripped off, who were, after all, dead in the head, raw meat wogs, that they should have their problems, and that Scientology should keep the money. So that, and I could name a series of people that I met who were con men or con women, and Scientology was a sort of perfect environment for them. Because they were being trusted. There was one guy who he left, and he saw me on the street about 2 or 3 years after he'd left, and he'd gone back in, and he stopped me because he wanted to explain to me that it was so easy taking money off Scientologists.
Big time. I tell you, I cannot even count on 2 hands the number of times over the years that I saw Scientologists taking advantage of other Scientologists with money loans and, some kind of financial shenanigans. I mean, Grant Cardone is kind of the epitome of what we're talking about, and he's tanking right now and bringing a whole lot of people down with him who are not even Scientologists. He was running his scam on Scientologists and non-Scientologists alike. So but he is a great example of exactly what we're talking about, because that is that slick con salesman personality. And it's all, yeah, exactly. That's right. And it's all about, trust me, I got your best interest at heart. It's going to be wonderful. You're going to skyrocket. You're going to 10x. You're going to 100x. It's going to be beautiful, man. And, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the road, it's bankruptcies all around.
Yeah. I mean, I met 2 guys who they'd gone out prospecting for gold, and one of them did actually have the qualifications to do this, and I'd better not name any names. And they had collected £2 million that they had given to Scientology, right? And in fact, I think that one of them spent $400,000 in 2 weeks and ended up in hospital with a heart attack in Florida. But when I said, well, what have you actually done for this? They were sort of, oh, well, we've collected the money and we'll go looking for the gold next. So 2 million had been raised, and none of it had been used to actually do any work. But it was ethically proper because, of course, it was for the greatest good of Scientology.
It's wild. I remember as a reg berating a sales prospect, a Scientologist that I had on the phone, because we had established this relationship. She called me one day from her new car. I got a new car. I'm so excited. Woo! She had the top down. She's like driving. And I'm like,
selfish.
The first thing I'm thinking, you did what? You bought what? But you're paying for your OT levels right now, and you're not done paying for them, and you went off and got a car. And I actually ended up lecturing her over the phone about her financial responsibilities. And I look back on that and I just cringe. It's awful, right? But I honestly felt, sitting in that chair, talking to her on the phone, I felt betrayed, and I felt entitled to her money.
Yeah.
Because I was her reg and I had her best interest at heart, and all I wanted her to do was go up the OT levels, and how dare she betray me like this?
Yeah.
Right?
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. And for anybody who's watching, if you want to wind up Scientologists, then my friend Mitch, who I already mentioned before, when he left, he maintained his correspondence with letter registrars around the world. And I think it was somebody at the Advanced Organization in Los Angeles, AOLA, who'd written to him, and he wrote and he said, "Oh, I've just inherited a huge amount of money and I'm wondering what to do with it. Now, should I pay my OT levels and all of that, or I quite fancy buying a Porsche, really?" And of course he got the letter back saying, and he wrote back and he said, "No, I've bought the car." That's very cruel, I think, but it was funny.
That was a little malice aforethought there. Yeah, that's pretty funny, but it's true. It's true. Yeah.
Next one, alterations in relations with others, including repeated search for a rescuer, which may alternate with isolation and withdrawal. And I've certainly seen this, and I've been the rescuer, which was not a position that I enjoyed. Let me just say that if anybody wants to be rescued, call the fire brigade.
Yeah. I have to admit that this definitely happened to me cyclically, repeatedly over the years. You have your ups and downs. My mom especially was my sounding board early on, was the person I could go to. And of course she has this sort of obligation to listen to me. And so she was, yeah, exactly. So she was always there for me, and that was really good. But yes, this has happened to me from time to time. I have had some slumps, I guess you could say, some times where life wasn't so rosy, and I really hit the skids, and I reached out to friends for help because I didn't really know who else to go to, and that was fine. Sometimes those friends were professionals in the field. I've managed to meet quite a few psychologists and people, therapists and stuff. So that's kind of, good for me. It took me a little while to realize, it took me about a year or two, actually, if I'm really honest, to realize I was kind of taking advantage of them. And that wasn't really very cool either.
How are you taking advantage of them, do you feel?
Well, I felt like I was, because I would, sometimes I would experience a problem of some kind, Scientology related problem. And it was just, okay, pick up the phone. I need your help right now. It was a little demanding. It was a little, and I have since learned, this is something I had to learn, and I don't put these demands on my friends anymore. And it wasn't anybody ever chewed me out over it or even hinted that what I was doing wasn't okay. I tempered that myself in looking at my own behavior on it. So I doubt that they even, I think the relationship with all of those friends that I have is such that they would have let me know if I was really, but maybe not. Anyway, I'm just saying I sort of put the skids on that myself, and because I recognize that behavior in myself.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I had a particularly bad intimate relationship where I found myself every 2 or 3 weeks calling on one of a group of, there were 5 close friends I had, and I was just coming apart in this thing, and these poor people would have to sit and listen to me for an hour and a half, what have you. And ultimately, and so, yes, I was looking to be rescued, and it never happened, because in the end, I said, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. And suddenly I was rescued, that was
right.
Great, and celebrate that all the time.
I think actually on that point of rescue, let me just comment on this real fast, because I think that I think one of the things that allowed me to change and in fact, maybe opened my eyes to the fact that I was trying to be rescued as opposed to being more responsible for myself and be, a grown-ass adult, right, and deal with my own problems. And again, when I say something like that, I'm talking about myself. I'm not talking about anybody else. Everybody's got their own situations. Everybody has their own context. So I am only talking about me when I say these things right now.
Yeah. And sometimes any of us need help. Sometimes we need help, and
exactly.
That's fine, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Exactly. But what I removed from the equation after learning all the things I've learned over the years, as this progression has rolled out, is that is that there isn't somebody else out there who's going to rescue me. That's not what relationships are for exactly. Not that kind of rescue.
No.
You know, not in this context. And I learned that standing on my own 2 feet is doable, actually enjoyable, you know, is more adult, you know, and I think I think of that in terms of maturity, because there's this saying, your expression, I'm sure you've heard, or maybe you even mentioned it one time, of, you know, your maturity level kind of stops the moment you go into a cult.
Well, it reduces down to age 11 or 12 is yeah. And then when you come out, you get to be 15 again.
And I was 15 when I got in, like really got in, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I actually can look back and see that was true, that is true, right? And some would say it's still true, but I think that I have actually matured quite a bit, and I know internally I have. I mean, it's not even a question. And this rescue point's actually part of it, is because I really was. What I'm trying to communicate is that when I was running to my friends or calling them or something earlier, it was in the spirit of a child running to a parent.
Yes. Yeah.
That was the flow, intention, thought process, all of it. And now it's not that. And I learned that I needed to respect myself, and I needed to learn how to respect them in a whole different way, to stop putting that on them.
Yeah.
But also that itself kind of got me out of this idea that I need to be rescued. Yeah. So kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone there, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's extraordinarily important that our independence is fundamental. I, from the age of 13, when I first had the good fortune to be discovered by a young lady, really did, and I was with her for 1.5 years, had relationships that lasted months, years. I was 19 years with my first wife, 8 years with my second wife. And as the years went by, there was still this sense that I was not complete, you know, like Plato's story about people having, first of all, had 4 arms and 4 legs and been split down the middle. I don't know how you do that, but that we're looking for the other half. And for me, it probably with the collapse of my last relationship, which was a few years ago, actually, I walked out and said, no, I can be self-partnered. I can be myself. And I don't have this desperate urge to be with somebody else. And now, because I'm a curmudgeon, I enjoy, not having to be involved in that. Which is probably a disability, really. But this sense that one is, desperately looking to another person to complete you or to rescue or to drag you out of it. No, we then go from dependence to independence to interdependence, which is the actual mature point where we're not isolated from other people. No man is an island. No woman either. Let's not get sexist about this. Mm-hmm. And for me, everything is relationship. I've said this often elsewhere, that when I gave up the notion of enlightenment, which took me all the way through Scientology and many years beyond, and got me into my 50s, and then I just went, I don't want this thing. I'm not interested in this thing. I want to have normal feelings, normal for me. I want, if something horrible's happened, I want to feel it. I don't want to go, I am in a serene state of bliss and it has no meaning to me. And if something wonderful is happening, I'm fine with that. To me, there's a web of connectedness, and we are able, when we're in trouble, to go and help others. And when they're in trouble, they come to us, and that's called family or extended family, and it's a good thing. But there is no, the rescue is there. It can become perpetual, that some people, they're dependent personalities or what have you, and they need to be rescued, and they're a pain. What can I say?
Well, no question. There actually is no doubt about that. I actually, everything you just said there made me think. I wasn't going to bring this up. I hadn't thought about it, but I think it's key to what we're talking about right now, in terms of my recovery or my process here, because one of the things that notably happened in the relationship that led to my current marriage was that I learned, in getting over my last relationship coming out of Scientology and all of that, and then kind of playing the field for a little while and kind of finding out what that's all about, because I'd never done that in my entire life, because I'd been in Scientology the whole time, right? Where having sex is verboten.
Hold somebody's hand, you have to get married, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So so that was kind of fun for a little while, but then learning to be independent, exactly as you said, learning to live a life where I was satisfied with how my life was, and I was actually okay with being alone.
Yeah.
And up until that time of my life, and this was just a few years ago, I had bought into all the rom-coms, soulmates, and that stuff is rife through Scientology too, by the way, guys. It's not like, Scientologists buy into all that soulmate shit too. So I had bought into all of that. That's, there's one person for me, or, this kind of thing. I'm not, you complete me, that Tom Cruise line, right? And I shed all of that. Then I met Melissa. And then we started dating, and then it was a wildly different experience from any other relationship I'd ever had, because I wasn't walking into it with, these moony calf eyes or whatever they call it, this like, it was very real. It was very mature, and it was not utility, it was not like, it was still wonderful. I mean, love is love, but it was not this all-consuming, I'll die for you on day 3 kind of thing. It was a little bit of a different approach, and we both went into it that way, and we openly talked about it. And that made this relationship so much more mature and so much better than any other relationship I've ever had. So I'll throw that in there on the mix as well.
I plug Eric Fromm at every chance I get these days. His book, The Art of Loving, is a really fantastic manual about what love is. And he comes to the definition, which is that love is complete union and complete separateness. It is so that you can be completely at one with your God. He's an atheist, but doesn't have a problem with God. I'm an agnostic and don't have a problem with it. At one with your partner, at one with your siblings, but also you have your independence, and there's no compromise. And I think far too often that what is portrayed as a loving relationship in our society is a dependent relationship, where, if you leave me, there'll be nothing left, that kind of thing. And, in the words of Echo, the wonderful Echo Belly, I am me all by myself. I don't need nobody else. Well, yes, we do need other people, but to complete ourselves, no. And to be good partners in a relationship, and I hope one day to be a good partner in a relationship, maybe, but to be good partners in a relationship means to have your independence, to have your maturity, and you then bring that to the table rather than, the begging phone calls at 2:00 in the morning.
Exactly. And it makes for such a, I keep you returning to this word mature relationship, but it makes for a better relationship, because you're with this person, they're part of your life, you're part of theirs, but at the same time, you really do maintain a level of independence as well. And you sometimes look at this person and you just go, wow, this is this whole other person who's choosing to be in my life rather than we are one. Because you're not one. That's just not. It's almost delusion, but it's certainly an illusion, that we sort of cast over our relationships, and I don't think it's a healthy one.
No,
I think it's a product of rom-coms and Hollywood and romance novels and other nonsense.
And something that grew in the 19th century, really, that relationships were still largely seen as being utilitarian or pragmatic, and then 2 things were invented. One was childhood, which had never existed in human history, really. Children were just these little things to be pushed down. And we started getting stories like Alice in Wonderland in the 1860s. And these privileged middle-class children would have a childhood. Of course, the working children would go down the mines and up the chimneys from the age of 4 onwards. And the upper classes who had the money would, of course, send them away to a preparatory school as soon as they could get rid of them, but this myth of childhood came about, and with it came the myth of the marriage, the marriage made in heaven, where this person would meet all of your needs, that you would everything you needed in life would come out of this person, which is a hell of a demand to make. So you'd be emotionally and intellectually and sexually completely satisfied by this person. And well, I tend to believe, it's a personal thing, but I tend to believe that in an intimate relationship, one should be completely sexually satisfied with one's partner. That for me is healthy, and I've not seen it work very well in the polyamorous community around me, having met people over the years that have done that. But outside of that, I treasure my friendships. There are a handful of people, maybe 10 or 12 people, yourself among them, who I regard as close friends. They're people that I can talk with about anything, and they'll have something interesting to say. I'll be listened to when I talk, which is useful. People understand you a bit better, I usually find, if they do that. And that every one of those relationships is quite unique. It's quite distinct and separate. And there'd be no way that I would give that up to retreat into a relationship with one person. A friend of mine once said to me that he couldn't be close to me anymore because he'd fallen in love with somebody. And it was like, well, so just one person at a time. Again, I agree with Eric Fromm that love is something that you feel. It's not anything to do with the object of your affection. You know how to love. And as he says, a narcissist doesn't know how to love, Freud's primary mistake. But once you know how to love, then you feel in that way towards other people and towards, your cat, hopefully, because cats are very important in this world. They direct us in all that we do.
We are complete slaves to our cat in our house.
Of course, well, you have to be. They're the superior species. What can I say? As long as it doesn't turn into the Tiger Kings and you start donating parts of your body to their diet. But okay, well, I think we've covered the next one, which is alterations in relations with others, including persistent distrust. I think we've done that one. Yep. The last one on there is repeated failures of self-protection. That as a symptom of complex PTSD, that in relating to other people, that one will fail to protect oneself from them. I certainly did that, though I've never really had PTSD.
I don't know that I see that one in my life particularly. I'd have to think about that one a bit more, but I think my trust issues have been such that I've not really, let myself get close to but a few people, and that one doesn't really bring anything to mind for me.
Well, we'll put that on the table for anybody out there who would like it. And point 7, and there are only 2 bits in this, so we are going to actually get to the end at some point.
Oh my goodness.
Is alterations in systems of meaning. And the first is loss of sustaining faith. Well, what are you going to say about that?
Oh my God, man. That has been the struggle. That has been the struggle for me. Because the most important thing about Scientology and its belief system for me was that I was a spiritual being who was immortal.
Yeah.
And I bought into that hook, line, and sinker. It was my worldview. That was my, every time I was facing an adversarial situation, a potentially dangerous situation, even getting on a plane and taking, flights around because I don't like flying. No. I tell myself, well, if it all turns, if it all goes to hell, if I die here, well, it's going to really suck and I'm going to lose all this stuff, but I'll still be alive. I'll still go. I'll still, I'll be able to come back. And that's all gone now. And I don't even know what words to use that I've described it many, many ways over the years, so I guess I've used those words, but it's hard, man. It is hard to lose something like that. At least it was for me.
Yeah, I think it is for anybody. William James, in the Varieties of Religious Experience, somewhere around 1901, the great William James, starts talking about conversion. And one of the things that fascinated me, and it is a great book, what an incredible mind the man had. But he starts saying, well, you can convert to something or from it. And he says, and the tendency will be that if you are what our friend Yuval would call a high fervor person, that you will convert hard into the belief in God and out of the belief in God. And for me, it was very gradual indeed that, I didn't believe in God from the age of 13, the idea of a personified, somebody who's going to sit and talk with me. To me, if there was any God, then there was something rather larger than that, and I prefer the Chinese notion of the Tao. And what's happened with me is that I lost everything and, became an atheist really and put everything aside. And it was, a little distressing. And then I went what is probably the Carl Sagan route, which, where you're going, oh, wow, what a wonderful thing the universe is. But there's a little twist in my story because I'd been involved in Buddhism. For people who've grown up in the Judeo-Christian Islamic world, then the idea is that you're going to live on in heaven afterwards, which sounds like a really boring place, as far as I can see. So I'm not sure about that. But hell sounds like quite unpleasant, and I'm not sure I like the idea of a God that would do that to us, either, trick us into, tempt us into that. So whatever. But there's that idea. If you come from a Buddhist or Hindu tradition, then of course what you're trying to do is not keep on living. What you're trying to do is to stop being. And you develop what is called the fear of the eternal return. It's why the notion of the simplistic hippie notion of reincarnation in Scientology, hey, I'll be able to do it in my next lifetime. It doesn't work for people who've actually thought about reincarnation. You're on the wheel of suffering. You want to escape your individuality and achieve anatta, no self, and enter nirvana, where you are just part of the bliss soup or whatever, the Buddha mind. And so for me, the conflict runs at both ends of the spectrum, living forever, not living forever, and I've come to a point of view, and I think part of this is Yuval and talking about evolution and realizing that there is this strange creature called symbolic evolution, that we can affect our DNA by the things we think and say, by the emotions we feel, by the culture that we're within. And so we are all part of this great tapestry. We're all threads in this great tapestry. And every one of us is important. Everyone's life is significant in the tapestry, the good we do, the harm we do. And the last few years, because it's been a long journey, I'm 64 now. The last few years, I just feel a great sense of contentment and satisfaction in the web of relationship in which I am. I also accept a principle that quite a lot of the 20th century mystics came to. Joseph Campbell, who was himself an atheist, though he talked about religion. Alan Watts, who was a little bit of a despicable character, I think, in some ways, but wrote some very interesting things. Mircea Eliade, the great religious scholar at Chicago University, they all talk about the eternal now, and they all point out that it's now. This is it. It's happening. I'm in it. So worrying about where it goes or where it came from, I revert back to Zhuangzi, the great Chinese philosopher, who said, I don't know where I was before I was born. I don't know where I'm going after I die. And on he went, it's like, I don't know. And it doesn't have any effect on me. So it is a very difficult journey to lose faith and to say, for me, from the age of 14, I can remember at 14 going, I want to know what the truth is. Even if it's hard, even if it's unpleasant, I want to know what the truth is. And I still don't 50 years later. But
I tell you, so much of what you're talking about totally mirrors what's gone through my head over the last couple of years. I went from total faith, Scientology, right? To, oh my God, it's all a disastrous mess. I bought into all of Hubbard's crap. And I put it all.
Dawkins.
Well, I went to a place where the umbrella of Hubbard, everything Hubbard said was bullshit. Everything Hubbard said was wrong. So what is the truth?
Yeah.
Then I start looking, and I have, of course, Carl Sagan route, science, Dawkins, the four horsemen of of atheism and all that. And I go into the skeptic community, and of course I'm surrounded by atheists, many of whom were also all in on religion, so they know exactly where I'm coming from. Found a very comforting circle of friends there, and people who would understand what I had been through and the betrayal that you feel when you find out it's all a lie. So that was great. But then I embraced science, and I went, yes, okay, this is objective, this is true, this is for real, let's, we provable, let's dive into this. And I went all in. I went down those holes, down those research trails, loved it, love learning things, definitely want to know the truth. I've got it right on my, Facebook page or whatever, that I'd rather live with an uncomfortable truth than a pleasing lie. That's definitely true. So now I spent many years going into science, go down psychology, sociology, now neurology, neuroscience, I should say. These fields, physics, had long talks with actual physicists who really know what they're talking about, not just people like Deepak Chopra who write about quantum, whatever. And learned, much to my chagrin and rejection for a very long time, they don't have it all figured out.
No.
In fact, they don't have hardly anything figured out. And you go, oh my God, how can this be possible? Again, this feeling, not the same level at all of betrayal that Hubbard provided, because nobody was lying to me. It's just, this is where we're at. And accepting, that struggle I talked about earlier, such a bad joke, but Mein Kampf, right, is that certainty isn't available in science either. And that's what I was actually looking for to start with. There was an emotional component there. I needed something filled. I needed that hole filled, and it wasn't getting filled. And I was very disappointed by that. But I had to face facts. I had to be real about it. I wasn't going to lie to myself again. So learning to accept that, which is place where you have gotten to, and embrace that and the wonderfulness of it all, I'm getting there. I see it. If I sort of look at that as the end of a road or a milestone along a path of life here, I see it where I couldn't even contemplate the existence of acceptance of that earlier. But it's still difficult for me because I know that I'm going to die not knowing things that I really want to know, because we're just not going to find out. There's just not enough time. There's just things that have to be figured out. And I kind of bum about that because I love knowing stuff, But I've started getting the idea, really embracing the idea, not just sort of giving it lip service, that maybe the fun is in the journey and in the discovery and in the trying to figure it out. And I got one of those heads that's just always thinking, think about stuff. So I'm always, what about from this angle? What about this from this frame? Maybe we're looking at it wrong, that kind of thing. And I take real pleasure in those kind of contemplations now. Whereas years ago, in the cult and coming out of it, I just wanted somebody to tell me the goddamn answers.
Yes.
Just tell me, what is it? What's the answer?
The Rubik's Cube. What do I do to get it to work? Yeah.
Exactly. Skip to the end of the Agatha Christie mystery. Who the hell did it? That was kind of my thing. And now I'm kind of like, no, let's read the book. Let's see what happens, And it's hard. It's been hard, but it has been probably the most important part of the journey of this recovery process for me, is that.
Yeah, Robert Louis Stevenson said it's better to travel hopefully than to arrive.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was
Especially because you're usually disappointed when you get there. I
that,
mean, you know what I mean.
I
It's,
do. And,
the dreams are
yeah, it's better to order something on Amazon than to unwrap it.
right.
Just the way it is with human beings. They're in the counter cult field in Germany. Somebody tried to introduce this wonderful word, Neugier, Neue meaning new, and the love of the new, the obsession with the new, which drives human beings. And sadly, the word didn't catch on. So we don't have that lovely word, Neugier. Then looking at Stephen Jay Gould, a professor in 3 subjects at Harvard and a real show-off, he took issue with Richard Dawkins on both the genetics that he was proposing and on his ideas about religion. And he talked about magisteria, different areas of understanding, so that what science does is it measures the quantities of things. What spirituality does is engages with the qualities of things. I mean, Robert Pirsig in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance makes the argument very well and tries to distinguish Aristotelian from Platonic thought, but it's so long ago since I read it, I can't remember anything, other than you've got quality and quantity. And he sort of said, look, it's a wrong idea, as himself the most successful science writer of the generation, Stephen Jay Gould. He sold more books than anyone else, and fabulous books about evolution, about what's going on. He made everything very interesting, and was certainly very helpful to me after I left Scientology. You know, as part of my scientific education was reading Gould. But that you're going into the wrong place, that science won't answer those questions, because it can't answer those questions, because it doesn't matter who had the Big Bang. You will never get into the moment of beginning, the ontology, the philosophy of beginnings. We can't do it. And we also can't go beyond human meaning, which is this wonderful place in which we exist. But we can touch on these things. As the Buddha said, he couldn't give you the moon, but he could be a finger pointing at the moon. And I find great consolation in the kind of very positive stoicism of Lao Tzu and Jiangsu, the Chinese philosophers, who seem to be able to put Epictetus among the Greeks. I came across him through Derren Brown a couple of years ago. Derren Brown's excellent book, Happy, very good book, and found that there was this line of thinking, a kind of Epicurean stoicism, that you could put together from Greek philosophy, which I had found long since in Chinese philosophy, where I still think it's better expressed, because it's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's like, here you are, you might as well get on with it and have a good time, And first, do no harm. Let that be the guiding principle. I no longer feel I have to love everybody, but I will not deliberately harm anybody, in word or deed. Wow, we're getting really
getting pretty deep here, man. Yeah. I tell you, though, it's true. I have been wondering, with this sort of punt that I perceive going on with dark matter and dark energy, this sort of like, okay, well, we don't know. We have this phenomenon. We can't explain it. So let's call it that.
Phlogiston.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The humors. I mean, like, I get that it's a bookmark. I get that it's a holding term for we don't get this yet. But when you make a claim that we don't get, like, what, 90% of the universe or something? I mean, like, you kind of go, okay, there's probably something extremely basic that we are either incapable of perceiving or incapable of imagining to perceive, and if we could perceive it. Somehow we're framing this situation in such a way that we're preventing ourselves from being able to see what is, 90% of the universe, right? Like I said, however much this stuff is, right? Like if we're, we think in the ways and terms that we perceive the world. How could we possibly think and communicate any other way? but I think we're getting to a place where we can see that maybe we can't see well enough, and we don't yet quite know how to build that microscope.
Yeah.
I constantly analogize to the microscope because because it allowed us to see a whole world we could not perceive.
Yeah, and the Micrographia by Robert Hooke is the beginning of modern science, not Newton, but Hooke drawing those astonishing flies' eyes and things. You go, oh, there's this other world, which reproduction was finally understood, that it wasn't that maggots were bred by rotting logs.
That's right.
Stuff like that.
That's right. It's a very magical world up until then, and it makes sense that it's a magical world because you couldn't see all these things we take for granted now. We understand electricity, we understand microbes.
To some extent.
Well, yeah, to some extent, exactly. We understand that there are, copper wires which electrons can flow through, and we can use that to make things happen, to alter the world. It was
a religious nutter who gave us that understanding, Michael Faraday, who was a member of the Sandemanians. Nearly all of the great innovators of science, I think Darwin is an exception. Darwin, of course, studied theology at university, which nobody wants to talk about, and was an agnostic and never became an atheist, and was most set on that. But nearly all of the great scientists, Newton, Galileo among them, were actually religious nuts. Even when you get to Big Bang Theory, and I'm not going to call Georges Lemaitre a nut, but he was a Catholic priest.
Right.
So things that people expect from science are not actually true.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, these guys were trying to figure out the world that God created. They were trying to figure out God's creation, right? So that they could better understand him or her or it or whatever you want to call it. And I'm down with that. I get that. I don't have to be a historical revisionist on that. I get that there are problems with religion. I get that there are problems with religious belief. I mean, duh. You and I just, have lived through some pretty clear-cut examples of that. Yeah. But you have to get to a place where you can be a bit more objective, and that's not the first few years that you come out of one of these situations. I never claim to be objective, ever, on this stuff, but I do claim now to be more objective than I used to be, because time and distance gives you that ability. So that's how I look at it. So I'm undecided on all the religious stuff, but I do see the positives as well as the negatives, and I'm willing to acknowledge those. And I know that is more than other people in the atheist community are necessarily willing to do on some fronts.
In my this year, my pursuit of Eric Fromm's ideas, I've finally come to a book called The Sane Society that he published in 1955, and he kept putting forward models. He was basically, he's this astonishing character. He was a psychoanalyst who studied at the Berlin Institute in 1929, became part of the Frankfurt School, Marcuse, Adorno, more recently Habermas, and who are probably the dominant philosophical school of the late 20th century. They're socialists, they're Freudians, and they put forward what will become postmodernism, that comes out of a dialectic with these ideas. I find all of it very confusing. I find all of the existentialists like Sartre very confusing. I don't understand where they're going. So I've latched onto Fromm, and in the introduction to this book, Fromm died in 1980. There's an introduction written by a social scientist in 1991, and he says something which really quite fascinated me and is relevant to our discussion about finding out that the social sciences don't have the answer either. So what he says is grand generalizations about what is wrong with our culture and how to put it right are nowadays more often to be found on the shelves of alternative bookshops than in the university library. Intellectuals today are either pragmatically occupied with making a living or immersed in a sort of refined hopelessness. Like neurotics who have been disappointed by one failed therapy after another, they have resigned themselves to the one counsellor who has always had time for them, their despair. Perhaps a book like The Sane Society, precisely because of its unfashionable intentions, can help us to jar out of this dead-end mentality. And I do think that that's where contemporary clinical psychology is. I think it's where contemporary social psychology is. I certainly think it's where sociology is, and therefore anthropology. That there is this sort of, well, actually being a human being is a terrible, awful, hopeless thing, but we've got to make the best of it. And I think they're wrong. And, you know, that in fact life is a marvelous and wonderful thing, and we shouldn't waste it spending our time listening to miserable gits complaining, you know.
I could not agree with you more, man.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. And postmodernism is a bit of a disaster. I mean, it is a train wreck, and it was a philosophical train wreck. And we can debate the merits of that, I suppose. I only have a passing knowledge of it. I've not dived into Deirdre and all these other guys, but I've read enough about it, listened to enough people lecture about it for enough hours that I go, okay, Enlightenment thinking, I'm down. Right? This postmodern, you know, modernist thinking, in other words, because that's what we're talking about, right? Yeah. The modern movement was a movement toward rational understanding of the world, not magical thinking. And on that count, I'm 100% on board.
Yeah.
Postmodernism seemed to take that and go, well, that all didn't work because we just came out of 2 world wars. And I can understand the worldview. 1950 was a very different time. 1940 was a very different time from how we are now. I get it. You know, those world wars were real. And a lot of people, you know, suffered greatly. But I don't think it was because of the Enlightenment that those things happened. It was, you know, there were a lot of factors at play there. And political factors, military factors, economic factors. It wasn't just all built on, you know, a philosophy.
And Queen Victoria's grandchildren arguing with each other. That was quite important for World War One. You know?
A little bit. So we have these events happen, and then philosophers react to it, and then we get this whole movement that unfortunately has sprung up in, you know, modern university based on this stuff. And it's been going along for decades at a strong clip, and we're now fighting and pushing back against it because we see the harmful effects of that in our society with the woke culture and the pushback. And as you say, the the despair, this idea that humans are not really worthy of existing, and what are we doing here anyway, and we're all just bad, and you know, and all of this. And it's like, well, okay, I mean, I guess, but you know, it's not like the facts that they rest these arguments on are all false, but they what they do is they overemphasize these facts and make negligible many positive things about humanity, about economics, about production, about all kinds of things across our culture. And they just ignore those things, and it becomes its own little culty thing. And that's my big problem with that.
And it's influenced. The problem is the influence has gone through government. So we are now ruled by cynical people who have bought into these fallacies.
Yep.
You know, the way that Margaret Thatcher during the early 1980s went through the whole enormous civil service in this country, you know, 100,000 people, what have you. And they were surveyed to find out whether they were doing their job because they wanted to help people or because they wanted to gain for themselves. And this kind of monetarist shock doctrine, Milton Friedman, neoliberalism, there are many words around it. It is the most dreadful idea, because what you're doing is you're promoting the sociopaths and getting rid of the empaths. And those who are more life-affirming, as Fromm would say, are being pushed aside because people say, no, I'm in it for the money. The only reason I'm, you know, they call me Mother Teresa, but I'm only here to actually promote the Catholic Church. You know, I do have an ulterior motive here. It's not because I'm actually saintly. And it's got rid of the idea of the good human being. In the arts, it meant that after the First World War, there was a continuation, particularly the so-called English Renaissance in music, which led to Benjamin Britten, and there were Finzi and Moran and Bax and Borton. There are a lot of great composers who are almost completely unregarded now. But after World War II, it was kind of decided that Auschwitz was the reality of the human condition. And the only art that was going to be sold was going to be highly intellectual and abstract. So you get Karl-Heinz Stockhausen syndrome, as Christian and I refer to it, where you've got the note C 147 times, you know, and I've heard it and it's rubbish. You get the intellectual stuff like John Cage giving you 2.5 minutes of silence, and the rehearsal was better than performance, as Jermaine Greer said. You get people, you know, banging a cello with a saucepan. You get all sorts of things which are meant to be, you know, and I don't mind, you know, if people want to do that, that's great. What bothered me through the late 70s, the way that conceptualism came along, and airheads, people like Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, who've got very little going on in their heads, I'm sorry to say, became the newly clothed emperors telling us what to think. And had conceptualism just gone that way, and Maurizio Catalan and all that Marcel Duchamp before him, that's all great stuff. It makes you think, it makes you feel, it makes things happen. But if that had gone along as a parallel line, but it didn't, it destroyed the visual arts. How many great artists in the last century have made beautiful things? You know, Picasso's not known for beauty. He's known for the emotional impact he caused, and quite rightly. I saw Guernica last year and it was amazing, you know. But how much of the arts is allowed to be about beauty, about joy? And you kind of go, oh yeah, strength through joy, this is going to be the Nazis or something like that. Why isn't the full range of human emotions available? You know, if I listen to Beethoven, I can hear suffering, I can hear tragedy. I won't hear it in Mendelssohn, say. But then I can hear redemption, which is what we're going to talk about very soon. And I just want it all back. I don't want it to be just like, yeah, there are 50 shades of grey and no colours, you know. Exactly. There are 80,000 colours and tones that the human eye can recognise. Let's have a bit more of that. Let's not think that comedy is a lower art than tragedy. It's much harder to do comedy than tragedy, as James Joyce pointed out. Let's celebrate that part of who we are. Let's celebrate the humour and the joy, as well as the misery and the nastiness. And what's more, let's do something which is where you and I fit into this, to expose the nastiness and say there are characteristics of the people who behave this way. There are characteristics of these groups. We don't have to live that way. You know, we can, rather than having a test that promotes them throughout our society, we can have a test that took a few of them out. You know, Barack Obama had the great chance to take out of the CIA the people who had tortured. And he decided not to do it because he didn't want to upset the Republicans. That's the best I can guess. And the movie, The Report, puts it all in great detail. The last point is alterations in systems of meaning, a sense of hopelessness and despair. And
well, that has definitely been described here, I think, you know, and the struggle of it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we've probably been through that. So yeah. I'm still John Atack. It's been great talking with Chris, and amazing that the marathon of the recovery conversations has come to, well, we think it's come to an end. But if anybody wants to comment or ask questions, we're both of us very talkative, and we like to offer our opinions about things.
We're not shy.
We're not shy. We'd be very grateful to hear that. So thank you very much for watching. Cheers, Chris. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.